Whoa. Okay. We interrupt your regularly scheduled programming
Yeah,
with some breaking news.
definitely breaking news.
This just in, former President Trump just made a huge announcement about his new cabinet,
Definitely a bombshell.
and people are going nuts trying to figure out what it all means.
Yeah, Washington is definitely in a frenzy right now.
So give us the scoop. Who is this mystery nominee, and why are people freaking out?
Well, the nominee for Secretary of Defense is Pete Hegseth.
Wait, Pete Hegseth. Really?
Yeah,
The Fox News guy.
that's right.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
that's a pretty wild card.
It's a bold move, for sure.
What's his background? What makes him qualified to run the Pentagon?
Well, Hegseth has a pretty diverse background. He served as an infantry captain in the Army National Guard
Okay.
and saw deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay.
So there's some military experience there.
Yeah, he's also a decorated veteran, awarded 2 Bronze Stars and a Combat Infantryman Badge.
Okay, so he's got some military cred.
Yeah.
But is that enough to run the entire Department of Defense? What else does he bring to the table?
Right. Well, beyond his military service, Hegseth has been very involved in media and veteran advocacy.
Okay.
You probably recognize him from his time co-hosting Fox and Friends Weekend.
Right, where he was a vocal Trump supporter.
Exactly. And he's also the CEO of Concerned Veterans for America, a pretty prominent veterans advocacy group.
So we've got the conservative media platform and the veteran connection. But is that the kind of experience that prepares you to manage something as massive and complex as the Pentagon?
Well, that's the question everyone's asking.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of debate right now about whether his background really aligns with the demands of this position.
So what's the word on the street? How are people reacting to this news?
Well, reactions have been all over the map. Some Republicans are applauding the decision, like House Speaker Mike Johnson.
Okay.
He praised Hegseth as highly qualified and believes he can bring a fresh perspective to the Pentagon.
What about the Democrats? I'm
Yeah.
guessing they're not too thrilled about this.
You got it. Democrats have expressed some serious concerns about Hegseth's lack of experience in managing a vast organization like the Pentagon.
Right.
And they worry about the potential for politicizing the military representative Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, went so far as to say he had no earthly idea who Hegseth was before this announcement.
Wow.
He even highlighted the sheer complexity of the Pentagon, describing it as the biggest bureaucracy in the world, a hard thing to run, in his words.
So even some seasoned politicians are a little surprised by this pick. It sounds like this nomination is going to be a bumpy ride.
Oh, definitely. And it's not just sparking debate within political circles. Even Fox News personalities, folks who generally align with Trump's views, seem caught off guard by this.
Really?
Yeah. Laura Ingraham, for example, remarked on air, "Wow, that is pretty cool. We're going to miss him at Fox, but that's a gain for the country," which is a pretty loaded statement.
Gain for the country. It's a bold claim.
Yeah.
I guess whether this is a win or a loss depends on who you ask. What are some of the potential consequences of this nomination, looking beyond the initial shock?
Well, one thing that immediately comes to mind is the potential impact on Trump's America First vision.
Right.
This appointment seems to signal a return to that approach, potentially leading to significant shifts in military policy and strategy.
Okay, can you give us a clearer picture of what that might look like in practice? What kind of policy changes should we be on the lookout for?
Well, it's still early, so specifics are hard to come by,
Sure.
but there are definitely some red flags. The Wall Street Journal, for example, reported that Trump's team is considering a draft executive order to create a board with the power to remove high-ranking military officers.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
A board to remove officers. Why would they do that?
It's not entirely clear, but some speculate it's a way for Trump to reshape military leadership,
Okay.
potentially replacing those who have been critical of him with individuals more aligned with his views. This, coupled with Hegseth's appointment, is raising serious concerns about potential purges within the military, particularly those who have openly disagreed with Trump in the past.
It feels like we're heading into uncharted territory here. The possibility of purging military leadership, a Fox News personality leading the Pentagon, it definitely seems like Trump is sending a very specific message.
Absolutely. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Remember, Hegseth himself has been quite outspoken in advocating for controversial policies, including pardons for troops convicted of war crimes.
You're right. There was a lot of controversy surrounding those pardons during Trump's first term, many granted to soldiers accused of very serious offenses.
Exactly. And Hegseth was a driving force behind those pardons, pushing for them while criticizing what he called woke policies within the military.
It seems like this appointment could trigger a massive change in how the military operates. What are some of the other potential friction points we should keep an eye on?
Well, one of the biggest unknowns is how Hegseth will navigate the existing military leadership. We've seen friction between Trump and the Pentagon before. During his first term, the defense secretary position was a revolving door with 5 different individuals holding the job in 4 years.
Right. Jim Mattis resigned after disagreeing with Trump on troop withdrawal from Syria, and Mark Esper was fired after the 2020 election.
Exactly. There was a lot of tension between Trump and the military establishment. Given Hegseth's outspoken personality and his close alignment with Trump, it's hard to imagine this will be a smooth transition.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It could be. And we also can't forget about the Senate. They still need to confirm Hegseth's appointment, and that's far from a guarantee.
That's true. You'd think with a Republican majority in the Senate, he'd have a clear path. But even within his own party, there might be some resistance. Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska, expressed surprise at the pick, saying she hadn't even heard his name mentioned as a possibility.
Yeah, it's a sign that this nomination has thrown even seasoned political players for a loop. The Senate confirmation hearings will definitely be a spectacle to watch.
So we've got potential conflicts with existing military leadership, concerns about politicization, and the possibility of major policy shifts. And that's before we even get to the Senate hearings. There's a lot to digest here.
There is. And there's more to the story. Hegseth's background and past actions are also raising eyebrows.
Like what?
Oh, like that quote where he talked about God using imperfect people in reference to Trump.
Oh, yeah.
That definitely generated a lot of buzz. And then there's the story about his Jerusalem cross tattoo, which some have linked to white nationalist groups.
Right, but didn't he deny any connection to those groups?
He did, but the fact that it's even a topic of conversation shows that this nomination comes with its fair share of baggage.
It seems like there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye.
There always is.
Huh.
This nomination has really set off some alarm bells with folks.
Yeah, it's definitely a curveball. This Hegseth pick has everybody kind of like scrambling to make sense of it all. You sent over some research on his background. Maybe we can start there.
Definitely. One thing that keeps coming up is his call for a return to military meritocracy.
Okay.
He's argued that the military has become too focused on things like diversity and inclusion at the expense of combat readiness.
So he's saying the military has gone woke.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been pretty vocal about what he sees as a left-leaning agenda within the military. He claims it's weakening our fighting force.
Which echoes some of the things we've heard from Trump himself, right?
Exactly. Trump has made similar statements, even suggesting the possibility of using the military to quell unrest among his critics, which is a pretty disturbing thought.
Yeah, it definitely raises concerns about the potential for the military to be used for political gain.
Yeah.
So assuming Hegseth is confirmed, what are some of the concrete changes we might see at the Pentagon? What's on his agenda?
It's tough to say for sure at this point, but based on his past statements and writings, it's possible we could see a shift in focus towards more traditional military priorities.
Like what?
Well, things like increasing troop strength, developing new weapon systems, and strengthening alliances with countries that share, what he considers shared values.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about the countries that don't fit into that shared values category? How might his approach to foreign policy play out on the global stage?
That's where things could get really interesting. Hegseth has been a strong advocate for an America First foreign policy,
Right.
which could translate to a more assertive, maybe even confrontational approach with countries like China and Iran.
So a more hawkish stance.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But we also need to keep in mind that Hegseth is, at his core, a commentator, not a policymaker. His role as Secretary of Defense would be to implement the policies set by the president.
That's true. But he would still have significant influence over how those policies are carried out, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. No doubt. His personal views and background will inevitably shape his approach to the job. Speaking of which, let's circle back to that Jerusalem cross tattoo that's been making headlines.
Oh, right. That's hard to ignore. Hegseth has said it's simply a reflection of his Christian faith.
Right. But critics argue that it's also a symbol associated with white nationalist groups.
So this isn't just speculation. There's some weight to this claim.
There is. The Jerusalem cross has been adopted by certain white nationalist organizations and has been displayed at some other rallies. So it's not exactly a neutral symbol, especially in today's political climate.
It's definitely eyebrow-raising, to say the least, to see a high-ranking military officer with a tattoo linked to extremist groups. This has to come up during his confirmation hearings, don't you think?
It's hard to imagine it not being a focal point. And speaking of those hearings, how do you think things might play out?
Well, based on everything we've discussed, it's shaping up to be a pretty contentious process.
Hmm.
The Democrats will grill him on his lack of experience, his controversial statements, and his close relationship with Trump.
They'll also likely want to dig deeper into his views on military justice, particularly given his role in advocating for those pardons for troops convicted of war crimes.
It's worth reminding everyone that he was a vocal supporter of those pardons, even though they drew widespread condemnation from both military leaders and legal experts.
It was a very controversial move by Trump and something that could come back to haunt Hegseth. Considering all of this, do you think he has a realistic chance of being confirmed?
It's a tough call.
Yeah.
He definitely comes with some baggage, and the Democrats will fight tooth and nail to block his nomination.
But he's also a very charismatic figure, and he has Trump's full endorsement.
True, and Trump still holds a lot of power within the Republican Party.
This whole situation has the potential to turn into a real tug of war, a battle for the soul of the Pentagon, you might say.
That might be a little dramatic.
Perhaps. But you can't deny it's a pretty dramatic situation all around.
No argument there. We've got a former reality TV star as president, a Fox News host as his pick for Secretary of Defense, and a country that's more divided than ever.
And now we're facing the possibility of a complete overhaul of the Pentagon.
It's a lot to take in, and it's only going to get more intense as we get closer to the confirmation hearings.
Buckle up. We're in for a wild ride.
In the meantime, we'll continue to bring you the latest on this developing story as it unfolds.
There are so many pieces to this puzzle, and we're just starting to put them together.
You've also flagged some interesting information about the global reaction to this news. We'll need to get into that next.
Definitely. This isn't just an American story. The world is watching, trying to figure out what a Hegseth-led Pentagon would mean for them.
So we've talked about how this nomination is shaking things up in Washington.
Yeah, and it's not just D.C. that's feeling the tremors. This news has definitely had an impact worldwide.
Makes sense. The world is always watching American politics, especially when it comes to the Department of Defense. What are you hearing from our allies? How are they reacting to this?
It's a mixed bag, but there's definitely some apprehension,
Right.
especially among our European allies. They're remembering the unpredictability of Trump's first term. Right.
And wondering if this is a sign of more of that to come.
I bet they're having some déjà vu, especially with the concerns about Hegseth's lack of experience and his ties to Trump. That America First rhetoric probably isn't very reassuring either.
You're right on the money. There's a real worry that Hegseth's appointment could mean a more isolationist foreign policy, putting a strain on some of those key alliances.
And practically speaking, they must be worried about impulsive foreign policy decisions, right? Especially since he's talked about reducing our military presence overseas. That can't be sitting well with allies who depend on us for security.
Definitely. And it's not just Europe that's on edge. Our allies in Asia are also feeling the heat. They're dealing with China and North Korea, and they rely on the U.S. for support. A change in leadership at the Pentagon, especially someone with Hegseth's views, well, raises a lot of questions for them.
So our allies are understandably nervous. What about our adversaries? What do you think this nomination says to countries like China and Iran? It's probably a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they might see it as a sign of weakness. More internal divisions within the U.S., that could play to their advantage.
But they must also be a little concerned given Hegseth's reputation.
Oh, absolutely. They know his stance on military strength and his willingness to use force. So while they might see an opportunity in American instability, they're also likely preparing for a more aggressive U.S. foreign policy under his leadership.
This really highlights the global impact of this nomination. Our allies are anxious, our adversaries are calculating their next moves, and the whole world is holding its breath.
It's a lot to process. What's the biggest takeaway here? What does this appointment really tell us?
I think it shows just how polarized American politics is and how trust in institutions is eroding. It also shows the power of media personalities and the influence Trump still has, even out of office.
It's like we're entering a new era in American politics, one that's defined by even more uncertainty. I think you're right. This nomination is a sign of a bigger change, a sign that we're in uncharted territory. It's a wake-up call for everyone to pay attention, get informed, and speak up. The stakes are higher than ever.
This has been a lot to unpack. Thank you for breaking it all down for us.
My pleasure. And as always, stay curious and stay engaged. This story is far from over.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this breaking news edition. We'll be back with our regularly scheduled programming soon.